Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. In divorce court, Elena's cries echoed through the solemn courtroom. Her voice trembled as tears slid down her carefully made-up cheeks. "He left me with nothing. He's a monster." Her attorney, Patricia, stood up, holding up a stack of documents in her hands. "Your Honor, these documents prove the emotional and financial abuse my client has suffered." David sat at the defense table with an expression as calm as a still lake. When he first met Elena 12 years ago at a computer science lecture at Stanford, she was so beautiful and moving, with green eyes that seemed to look into his soul. Now, all that remains in those eyes are cold calculations and well-crafted tears. "My children know the truth," Elena continued to cry. "They have witnessed their father's callousness." 15-year-old Sarah and 13-year-old Michael were called to the witness stand. David looked at his child, and a stabbing pain welled up in his heart. Sarah avoided her father's gaze, her voice light as a feather. "Dad always ignores us. He only cares about his computer and his company. Mom said that Dad threatened to send us away if we didn't listen." Michael nervously rubbed his hands together and repeated what he had obviously been trained to say over and over again. "Dad is scary. He monitors our phones and computers. He said if Mommy left him, he'd let us never see her again." David's attorney, Robert, tried to rebut, but Patricia quickly produced more documents. Here are screenshots of Mr. David Reeves' threatening text messages, as well as evidence that he installed surveillance equipment in his home to watch his family. Judge Thompson scrutinized the documents and frowned. David knew these were forgeries, but extremely well made. As a software engineer who spent 2 decades in Silicon Valley, he could recognize signs of digital fakery, but the evidence nearly fooled even him. Just then, a bailiff approached the bench and handed over a simple manila envelope. Puzzled, Judge Thompson opened the envelope and removed its contents, a USB drive and a note. "Mr. David," the judge's voice held confusion. "It seems there is a video here that changes everything." Elena's face instantly paled like paper. 8 months ago, David first suspected his wife of infidelity not because he found any obvious clues, but because she began to show unusual concern for cybersecurity. As the founder and CTO of Dataflow Solutions, David has a keen eye for people's digital behavior patterns. "Do you think our home Wi-Fi is safe?" Elena asked while preparing coffee in the kitchen one Tuesday morning. The question itself is not surprising, but the timing is suspicious for someone who has never cared about the technical details. "Why do you ask that all of a sudden?" David put down the tablet in his hand. "Nothing. Just heard from a friend that it's easy for hackers to break into home networks these days." Elena's answer was too fluid, like it had been prepared. David spent 20 years in the tech world building a cloud computing company with over $50 million in annual revenue. His success stems from an extreme attention to detail and a deep understanding of human behavioral patterns. Elena's sudden interest in cybersecurity is as conspicuous as someone who never watches sports suddenly asking about basketball rules. That evening, David worked late into the night in his home office. Through the glass door, he saw Elena in the living room, sending messages on her cell phone with a somewhat unusual expression of concentration. Every now and then she would look up to see if anyone was watching her, an alertness that was a newly acquired habit. David didn't act immediately. As a man who lives by data and logic, he needs more information. The next day, he began to observe Elena's daily patterns. She began leaving the house at certain times, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 5 p.m., always for shopping with friends or yoga class. But David remembers that Elena was never an avid exerciser. "Where are you going today?" David asked one Thursday, pretending to be casual. "The yoga studio. I told you about it." Elena is putting on her makeup, moving more carefully than usual. "Which studio? Maybe I can get you an annual pass." Elena's hand in the mirror paused for a split second. "Lotus Studio, downtown." "No, I'm still in the trial class phase." David nodded, but the name was already noted in his mind. That afternoon, he drove past every yoga studio in the city center without finding a place called Lotus Studio. The discovery shifted David's skepticism from vague unease to concrete alarm. Not only is Elena lying, she's lying carefully. The fact that she chose a non-existent location as a cover shows that her deception was well thought out. David realizes that he's not dealing with a spur-of-the-moment infidelity, but an elaborate plot. As a technologist, David has surveillance skills that ordinary people don't have. But he opted for the most traditional method, hiring a private investigator. Marcus Reed is a military veteran specializing in marital infidelity investigations. He charges a small fee, but his work is extremely professional. I need to know exactly what my wife is doing when she's lying, David told Marcus in an out-of-the-way coffee shop. How long? Marcus asked, his voice low and professional. From today until we find the answer. Marcus nodded and accepted the assignment. He was found by David through friends in the security community and has an impeccable career record. More importantly, he knows how to work within a perfectly legal framework. A week later, Marcus provided the first report. Elena does lie, but the truth is more complicated than David thinks. Instead of going to a yoga studio, she went to an upscale apartment building. What's even more shocking is that she has the access card for that building. She was on the 12th floor for 3 hours, Marcus reported, and the apartment was registered to Vincent Torres. This man is an investment advisor, married with 2 children. David felt a wave of vertigo. Not only is Elena cheating on him, but she's choosing to do it with a man who has a family. But what really shocked him was yet to come. One more thing, Marcus continued. According to my research, Mr. Torres' wife, Carmen, also employs private investigators. It looks like both dogs are betraying their families, and their respective spouses are getting suspicious. This information made David realize that things were far more complicated than he had imagined. Not only are Elena and Vincent having an affair, they're both cheating on 2 families at the same time. This symmetry gives David a strange sense of anger. They treat marriage and family as games to be manipulated at will. Later that evening, David sat in his home office facing 3 monitors, but the code on the screens became a blur to his eyes. Elena was upstairs reading bedtime stories to the children, her voice gentle and motherly, as it had been every night for the past 13 years. The contrast made David feel a deep sense of nausea. Over the next few weeks, David continued his investigation. He didn't confront, he didn't explode, he didn't even change his behavior patterns. Instead, he began systematically recording all of Elena's behavior. As a software engineer, he understands the importance of data. Emotions may cloud judgment, but data doesn't lie. David begins to notice other unusual patterns in Elena's behavior. She began checking her cell phone more frequently and always placing it face down. She began to wear perfumes she had never worn before and to buy clothing in styles that were very different from what she was used to. Her smile became wider, but at the same time more contrived. Even more disturbing, Elena begins to show an unprecedented interest in the family's finances. She began asking David about his company's income, about their investment portfolio, and even hinted that she wanted to be more involved in financial decisions. I feel like I should know more about our finances, Elena said one weekend while they were having breakfast together. I need to know how to manage this if something happens to you. David ostensibly agrees to her request and even gives her access to some of her accounts. But being a prudent businessman, he makes sure Elena only sees the information he wants her to see. At the same time, he began monitoring Elena's access patterns to these accounts. Through legal means, David obtained more information. Elena and Vincent's relationship has been going on for 8 months. Even more outrageous, by analyzing Elena's spending patterns, David discovers that she spent tens of thousands of dollars on the relationship. Expensive hotel rooms, dinners at fine restaurants, and even jewelry and gifts. All of this spending came from their joint account, and Elena has been using David's money to fund her affair. This betrayal is not only emotional, but also financial. David realizes that Elena is not only cheating on him, she's stealing from him. The more egregious revelation is that Elena is systematically alienating her children from him. Through further investigation by Marcus, David learned that Elena would say to the children when he was working late, "Look, Daddy chose work over us again." She will also imply that David is cold to his family and doesn't care about their feelings. "Sarah told me she thinks you've been aloof lately," Elena said to David one weekend, feigning concern. "I'm on good terms with Sarah," David replied. But in his heart he knew Elena was stirring up trouble. "Maybe you should spend more time with the kids instead of staring at those computers all day." David realizes that Elena is not only preparing for a divorce, but also for a custody battle for the children. She is constructing a narrative that portrays David as a workaholic who neglects his family and herself as a victim of neglect. This realization revolutionized David's strategy. If Elena wants to play the game, he'll make sure he wins it. As someone who has survived 2 decades in the competitive tech industry, David knows how to develop and execute complex strategies. He began to construct his own system of evidence. Through completely legal means, David records every meeting between Elena and Vincent. He hires another private investigator to specialize in Vincent's background and discovers that the man has a history of cheating on married women. It's not the first time Vincent Torres has carried on an extramarital affair. David's investigation reveals that Vincent has had sex with at least 3 different married women in the past 5 years. Each time it followed the same pattern. He would choose women in good financial standing, establish an emotional connection with them, and then gradually benefit financially. More importantly, David begins to document Elena's manipulative behavior towards the children. He installed recording equipment in his home, perfectly legal because it was his own home. These recordings capture Elena telling the children that David doesn't love them and how she trains them to testify in future court proceedings. If anyone asks you about Daddy, David heard Elena say to the children, you are to tell them how Daddy neglected you and made you feel afraid. But Dad didn't scare me. Michael's voice was full of confusion. Honey, sometimes things are complicated between adults. You just need to remember that Mommy loves you all and Mommy needs your help. Hearing these recordings, David felt a cold anger. Not only is Elena betraying him, she's corrupting his relationship with his children. This is no longer simple marital infidelity, but a premeditated attack. David decides it's time to start his comeback. But he doesn't use manipulation and deception like Elena does. Instead, he will use the truth, the well-documented, undeniable truth. David's first step is to make sure Elena doesn't have access to his real finances. As a seasoned entrepreneur, he has long had a sophisticated asset protection structure in place. He began moving assets into trusts and offshore accounts that Elena couldn't reach. At the same time, David began to build a wider network of surveillance. He hired a specialized digital forensics team of former FBI cybercrime experts. The team helped David legally monitor Elena's digital footprint, including her email communications, social media activity, and even her GPS location data. Through this surveillance, David discovered a complete record of communications between Elena and Vincent. Not only are they plotting how to handle their respective marriages, but they are also discussing how to maximize the benefits from their divorces. In an email to Vincent, Elena wrote, David is completely oblivious to what is happening. He was so focused on his work that he didn't even notice the changes at home. It gives us the perfect opportunity to plan our future. Vincent's response was even colder. My attorney said we could both get a better result if we both filed for divorce at the same time and acted as witnesses to each other's spousal misconduct. The key is timing and coordination. Reading the emails, David finally understands Elena and Vincent's complete plan. Not only are they having an affair, they are conspiring to destroy 2 families at once in order to maximize their own financial gains. David also discovers that Elena has begun secretly consulting with a divorce attorney. She chose Patricia Winters, the most expensive and aggressive lawyer in town, specializing in getting huge settlements for her clients from wealthy husbands. Elena has met with Patricia 3 times to discuss how best to attack David's assets and reputation. To add insult to injury, David discovers that Elena is creating false evidence to support her case. She hired a company called Digital Solutions, actually an illegal service that specializes in creating fake evidence, to create fake text message records and emails that portrayed David as a control freak and potential domestic violence perpetrator. The records portrayed David as a control freak and potential domestic violence perpetrator. Remember, Elena wrote in an email to this company, this evidence has to look absolutely real. I need to show that David threatened me and the kids, dated back at least 6 months. Price is not the issue, it's the quality that matters. This discovery takes David's anger to a new level. Not only has Elena betrayed him, not only is she stealing from him, but she is preparing to completely destroy his reputation and relationship with his children in court. She was prepared to portray him as a dangerous man, a father unfit to have custody of his child. David realizes that he's facing not just a divorce, but an all-out war. Elena and Vincent are using every possible weapon to destroy him, including the most precious thing he has, his relationship with his children. But David has an advantage that Elena doesn't. He knows the truth, and he has the power to prove it. As a technologist, he understands the power of digital evidence and how to present it effectively in court. David begins to formulate his counter-strategy. Instead of simply defending himself against Elena's attacks, he's going to expose her deception once and for all. He wants the judge, the jury, and even the whole neighborhood to see Elena for who she really is. David's program includes several key elements. First, he's going to continue to gather records of Elena and Vincent's correspondence and evidence of their meetings. Second, he wants to document Elena's manipulative behavior toward the children and her creation of false evidence. Finally, and most importantly, he's going to reveal all of this evidence at the most crucial moment in the court proceedings following Elena's divorce filing. David knows that timing is critical. If he exposes Elena's behavior too soon, she'll change tactics or destroy the evidence. If he waited too long, her false evidence could damage him irreparably. He needed to find the perfect moment to strike a blow. Meanwhile, David begins to prepare for his upcoming legal battle. He quietly hires one of the best divorce attorneys in California, but instructs the attorneys to act mediocre on the surface, allowing Elena's team to underestimate their abilities. At the same time, he begins to build a strong support team, including digital forensics experts, financial analysts, and even psychologists to analyze Elena's manipulative behavior toward the children. David also set out to protect his business interests. He knows that Elena will attack his company during the divorce process, trying to claim that she contributed to the company's success and therefore deserves shares. To prevent this, David began to restructure the company's ownership structure to ensure that Elena could not make a legal claim to the company's core assets. Meanwhile, David begins to plan how to handle the kids. He knew Elena had begun to poison the children's impression of him, and that was the part that pained him the most. But he also knew that once the truth was revealed in court, the children would realize they had been manipulated by their mother. David began to prepare how to help the children deal with this trauma, including arranging for a counselor and developing a recovery plan. 6 months later, just as David's company was preparing for its next round of funding, Elena finally made her move. She handed David divorce papers on a Friday night when he returned from a business trip. "I've had enough, David," Elena said, her voice tinged with rehearsed sadness. "Our marriage is dead and the kids can relate. I think it's best for everyone to be separated." David took the papers, looking outwardly shocked and hurt. "Elena, we can work through these issues with counseling. I know I've been busy, but I'm open to change." "It's too late," Elena said firmly. "I've made my decision. I want the process to be as friendly as possible for the sake of the kids." David knew what Elena meant by friendly. She wanted him to not fight back and give up everything she asked for. But David just nodded and said, "I need time to process this news. Can we talk tomorrow?" Elena agreed, assuming that David's mild reaction meant her plan was going well. What she doesn't realize is that David has been preparing for this moment for months. That night, after Elena and the kids were asleep, David activated his legal team in his office. By the next morning, they were ready for Elena's impending attack. The next day, Elena filed her petition for divorce with the court, along with a series of supporting documents alleging that David had engaged in emotional abuse, financial control, and emotional neglect. She also filed a temporary injunction in an attempt to prevent David from approaching the family home and the children. Patricia Winters announced in a press release, "My client, Elena Reeves, is a brave woman who has finally found the courage to leave a controlling and abusive relationship. We have ample evidence that Mr. David Reeves engaged in years of emotional abuse against my clients and their children." The media immediately latched onto the story. News of a successful tech entrepreneur accused of domestic violence always grabs attention. Shares of David's company fell 8% on the day. But David remained calm. As planned, he hired seemingly mediocre attorney Robert Chun and acted in public like an innocent husband shocked by an unjust accusation. Instead of immediately countering Elena's accusations, he lets her get on with her act. Over the next few weeks, Elena's team continued to build their case. They submitted more evidence, including those fake text messages and email records. They also began preparing Sarah and Michael for their depositions, training them to testify against their father in court. David silently observes all this and continues to gather evidence. Every action Elena took, every word she said to the children, every false document she filed, was carefully documented by David's team. Meanwhile, David begins to execute the next phase of his plan, exposing Vincent Torres. Through his network of private investigators, David obtains evidence of Vincent's relationships with other women. He anonymously leaked this information to Vincent's employer and professional regulatory bodies. Soon, Vincent finds himself facing a professional investigation and possible license revocation. His wife Carmen also filed for divorce around the same time, and she had hard evidence of Vincent's infidelity. Vincent's perfect life begins to crumble. This stress begins to affect Elena and Vincent's relationship. David discovers by monitoring their communications that Vincent is beginning to blame Elena for exposing their relationship, while Elena worries that Vincent might betray her to save her career. But David's real strategy has yet to unfold. He knows Elena will present her false evidence in court, and he knows the children will be forced to testify against him. He was prepared to let all this happen and then deliver the killing blow at the most critical moment. 3 months later, the Reeves versus Reeves divorce case went to trial in the Superior Court of California, San Mateo County. The courtroom was packed with media and observers, and the divorce case involving a tech industry executive has become a local hot topic. Judge Thompson, a veteran judge with 25 years of trial experience, is known for his fairness and intolerance of courtroom drama. He looked sternly at the packed courtroom and warned everyone to keep order. Patricia Winters stood up to make her opening statement, her voice filled with dramatic anger. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today not just to deal with a divorce case, but to expose the true nature of a domestic tyrant who hides beneath the veneer of success." Patricia described in detail the so-called psychological abuse suffered by Elena, including financial control, emotional manipulation, and threats against the children. She showed Elena's carefully prepared evidence, including those forged text message logs. Mr. David Reeves used his wealth and technological capabilities to monitor and control his wife, Patricia continued. He installed surveillance equipment in his home, listened in on Elena's phone conversations, and even threatened to never let her see her children if she left him. David sat at the defense table, and his attorney, Robert Chun, did look like a lawyer of mediocre ability, looking a bit overwhelmed by Patricia's attacks. David himself displayed appropriate shock and hurt, occasionally shaking his head in denial of the allegations, but did not show excessive anger or defensiveness. Elena's performance culminates when she is called to the witness stand. She wore a conservative navy blue suit and light makeup and looked like a woman who had suffered but still had dignity. "Please tell the jury that Mrs. Reeves, when did your marriage start having problems?" Patricia asked. Elena's voice trembled as she began her testimony. "About 3 years ago, David became more and more controlling. He started questioning every friend I had, every outing. He would check my cell phone and even install a GPS tracker in the car without my knowledge." The accusation caused a buzz in the courtroom. David shook his head slightly in his seat, but there was no other reaction. "Did he ever threaten you?" Patricia continued to ask. "Yes," Elena replied as tears began to slide down her cheeks. "He said if I left him, he would make sure I never got custody of the kids. He said he had a way of proving I was an unfit mother. He also said he would use his money and connections to destroy my life." Patricia presented those falsified text message records as evidence. These messages showed David sending threatening messages to Elena, including monitoring her activities and warning her not to leave. "Are these the messages your husband sent you?" Patricia asked. "Yes," Elena confirmed. "He often sends messages like this late at night, especially when he's traveling. I feel like even when he's not home, he's watching me." Robert Chin's cross-examination was weak. He attempted to challenge Elena's allegations, but failed to provide any strong rebuttal evidence. He looks like a lawyer overwhelmed by the level of preparedness of his opponent. "Mrs. Reeves," Robert said, "don't you think that all the problems in a marriage need to be the responsibility of both parties?" The question elicited a strong objection from Patricia. "Objection. It's victim blaming." "The objection stands," Judge Thompson ruled. Robert looked even more confused as he ended his ineffective cross-examination. Next came the children's testimony, which was the most painful part of the entire trial. Sarah and Michael have been carefully trained by Elena, and their testimony is consistent in portraying David as a cold, controlling father. Sarah was the first to testify. She was dressed in plain clothes and looked nervous but determined. Sarah, can you tell us how you feel about your father? Patricia asked gently. I love my dad, Sarah began, but he scares me. He was always working and would get angry when we try to talk to him. He spies on our computers and cell phones and says it's for our protection, but it feels more like he doesn't trust us. Patricia asked, did you ever hear your father threaten your mother? Sarah nodded. Once, I heard him tell Mom that if she left him, he would make sure we never chose to live with her. He sounded angry, and Mom was crying. David looked at his daughter with pain in his heart. He knew Sarah was repeating what Elena had taught her, but her performance was so realistic that even he was close to being convinced himself. Michael's testimony was even more heartbreaking. The 13-year-old boy looked scared and confused, but he stood by his testimony. Dad always told us he loved us more than Mom, Michael said. He said if we chose to live with Mom, we were betraying him. He also said he had the money to hire the best lawyers and that Mom had no chance of winning. Upon hearing these words, some observers in the courtroom began to cast angry glances at David. Media reporters were frantically taking notes. David's company shares continue to fall. Robert Chin again engaged in weak cross-examination, but it had little or no effect on the children's testimony. He looks like a lawyer who has been completely outclassed by his opponents. At the end of the presentation of Elena's side of the case, Patricia gave a stirring closing argument. Members of the jury, you have heard a heartbreaking story of power abuse and domestic tyranny. David Reeves used his wealth and position to control and terrorize his family. Elena Reeves and her children deserve justice, and they deserve to be free. She asked the jury to grant Elena a huge property division, including a majority stake in David's company and full custody of the children. David Reeves must suffer the consequences of his actions, Patricia declared. He must pay for the pain he has caused his family. Then it was David's turn to defend himself. Surprisingly, however, Robert Chin announced that they would not be making opening statements or calling witnesses. Your Honor, Robert said, we believe the plaintiff's case is fatally flawed, and we will prove it in due course. The announcement caused confusion in the courtroom. Patricia looks both confused and angry. Elena clearly did not anticipate this development. Judge Thompson banged his gavel to restore order. Mr. Chun, this is an unusual strategy. Are you sure you don't want to defend your client? Yes, Your Honor, Robert confirmed. We believe the truth will speak for itself. Just as the judge was about to make his final statements and instructions, the bailiff approached the bench and handed over the manila envelope. Confused, Judge Thompson opened the envelope and removed the USB drive and note. He read the note and then looked over at David. Mr. Reeves, the judge said, it looks like there's a video here, and it may be relevant to this case. Before I watch it, I need to know if you know anything about it. David stood up and for the first time in the entire trial showed real emotion. Your Honor, I have no knowledge of the origin of this envelope, but if it contains evidence relevant to the case, I think it should be reviewed. Elena's face began to turn pale. She whispers to Patricia, but Patricia looks equally confused. The judge decided to watch the video in court. The lights dimmed and the big screen lit up. The video begins to play, showing clear footage of Elena and Vincent in Vincent's apartment. But it's not just a cheating video. Here's the full conversation where they discuss how they destroyed their respective spouses. We need to make sure David looks like a control freak and potential abuser, says Elena in the video. I've found a company who can create any digital evidence we need. Good, Vincent replied. I'm working on a similar strategy for dealing with Carmen. It's critical that we coordinate our actions and make sure our stories support each other. The video continues with scenes of Elena instructing how to create fake text messages and emails. She explains in detail how to make David look like a threatening and controlling husband. These messages need to seem absolutely real, Elena says in the video. They must be able to pass the court's technical analysis. Price is not an issue, and the money we can get from the divorce will more than make up for that investment. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Everyone looked on in shock at the deception and manipulation displayed on the screen. But the video doesn't end there. The most devastating part is the scene where Elena brainwashes the kids. Sarah, Michael, Elena says to the children in the video, I need you to help mommy. Dad doesn't love us anymore. But if you say the words I taught you in court, we can get rid of him and start a new life. But Mom, Michael says in the video, Dad never threatened us. Honey, Elena replied, sometimes adults do things that children don't understand. You just have to trust mommy and talk like we practiced. That way we can be together forever and no one can hurt us. The video shows Elena spending hours training the children how to lie in court, how to act scared of their father, and how to describe threats and abuse that never happened. When the video ended, the entire courtroom was in a state of shock. Elena sat in her chair, her face pale as paper, her body trembling. Patricia looks completely shocked, apparently not realizing that her client has engaged in deception on such a massive scale. Sarah and Michael sit in the audience with confusion and shame in their eyes, beginning to realize that they are being manipulated by their mother. Judge Thompson's expression was frighteningly stern. Ms. Elena Reeves, these videos, if true, show you committing perjury, creating false evidence, and manipulating a minor to lie in court. These are serious felonies. Elena tried to stand up and speak, but her voice was too shaky to form words. The judge turned to Patricia. Ms. Attorney, are you aware of these actions by your client? Patricia shook her head. No, Your Honor. If these videos are real, my client is withholding important information from me. I need to request a timeout to consult with my client. The suspension is denied, the judge said sternly. We will continue to do so. David finally stood up to speak, his voice calm and strong. Your Honor, I would like to clarify the source of these videos. For the past 8 months, I have suspected that my wife is unfaithful and that she may be planning actions against me. By perfectly legal means, I obtained this evidence. David explained how he obtained the footage through legitimate surveillance and investigation. He didn't hack into any private systems, he didn't illegally wiretap, and he didn't use any illegal tactics. Instead, he used his technical expertise and resources to expose the truth. These videos were taken at locations that I legally own or have a right to access. David continued. Ms. Elena's manipulation of the children in our home was recorded because I have the right to have surveillance equipment on my property. The video in Vincent Torres' apartment was obtained through a legal agreement with the building's management company. The truth is that David used his technical skills and business connections to mount an elaborate counterattack after discovering Elena's infidelity. Not only did he hire a private investigator, but he also obtained surveillance access to Vincent's apartment building through legal means. He even became a partial investor in that building through a shell company, thus gaining legal surveillance rights. Elena and Vincent think they're smart, but they're up against a master strategist honed in the business battles of Silicon Valley. David had them completely exposed to his plans and then delivered the killing blow at the most critical moment. Judge Thompson's expression showed his deep disgust at Elena's behavior. Mrs. Reeves, not only are you attempting to commit fraud in a court of law, but you are manipulating your minor children into participating in this deception. This is one of the most egregious acts I have ever seen in my 25 years of judicial service. Patricia tried to make a last-ditch defense of her client. Your Honor, my client may have made a mistake in judgment, but she's just a desperate woman trying to protect herself and her children. Protect yourself from what? The judge asked sternly and rhetorically. It appears from the evidence that Mr. David Reeves was the victim of such a conspiracy, not the perpetrator. Your client systematically orchestrated the defamation of her husband, created false evidence, and manipulated her children into lying in court. That's not desperation. That's malicious criminal behavior. The judge turned to Elena. Mrs. Reeves, do you have anything to say in your defense? Elena tries to speak, but only makes incoherent sounds. Her whole strategy had completely collapsed, and she was clearly unprepared to deal with the exposure of the truth. The judge announced his decision. In view of Ms. Elena Reeves' fraudulent conduct and contempt for the judicial process, I summarily dismiss all of her property and custody claims. In addition, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation. He continued, Mr. David Reeves will receive full ownership of all joint property, as well as full legal and physical custody of the 2 minor children. Ms. Elena Reeves will only have court-supervised visitation until further notice. The courtroom erupted in confusion. Reporters frantically took notes. observers murmured. Elena crumbles into her chair, and Patricia looks totally shocked. But the judge wasn't finished. In addition, Ms. Elena Reeves must pay Mr. David Reeves all legal fees and investigative costs, totaling more than $500,000. She must also undergo a psychological evaluation to determine her suitability for unsupervised contact with her children. Sarah and Michael are now openly crying and beginning to realize that they were manipulated by their mother into participating in the attack on their father. David looked at his children with pain in his heart, but also with a sense of relief. The truth has finally been revealed. When the court adjourned, Elena was taken away by bailiffs pending a bail hearing. She faces multiple felony charges, including perjury, manufacturing false evidence, and witness manipulation. Patricia left the courtroom in a hurry, clearly shocked that her client had withheld such important information from her. Her professional reputation was also tarnished by her inadvertent participation in this fraud. David walks towards his children, who are now accompanied by social workers. Sarah and Michael look both scared and ashamed. "Dad," Sarah cried, "we're so sorry. Mom told us it was the right thing to do." David got down on his knees and hugged his children. "It's not your fault. You are also victims. We'll get through this together." Over the next few weeks, both Elena and Vincent faced serious consequences. Elena was charged with multiple felonies and ultimately sentenced to 2 years in prison and 3 years probation. She lost custody of her children and was only allowed to visit them once a month under strict supervision. Vincent's situation is equally tragic. His investment advisor's license was revoked, and his wife, Carmen, obtained a divorce and most of their joint property. His career was completely destroyed, and he had to move out of California to try to start over somewhere else. What's more, Elena and Vincent's plot was widely reported in the media as a warning case of family law fraud. Their names became synonymous with betrayal and manipulation. David begins to rebuild his relationship with his children. Through family therapy, Sarah and Michael come to understand how they were manipulated by their mother and the difference between the truth and the lies Elena taught them. "Why should we take Mom's word for it?" Michael asked during a therapy session. "Because you love her," David replied. "Children naturally trust their parents. It's not your fault." Therapist Dr. Amanda Rodriguez explains, "Ms. Elena took advantage of your trust and love for her. It's a form of emotional abuse, and you are the victims." Over time, Sarah and Michael begin to return to a normal relationship with their father. They realize that Elena's portrayal of David is a completely false image and that the real David is a loving, supportive father. David's company has also recovered from the scandal. When the truth was revealed, the stock quickly rebounded and even surpassed its previous levels. Investors and clients are impressed with David's integrity and his ability to expose fraud. 6 months later, David was sitting in his redecorated home office while Sarah and Michael did their homework. The atmosphere in the house was harmonious and calm, and for the first time in years it felt like a real home. "Daddy," Sarah asked, "did you already know Mommy was lying?" David considered how to answer. "I knew something wasn't right, so I chose to find the truth. The truth hurts sometimes, but it's more valuable than a lie." Michael looked up. "Will we ever see Mom again?" "If you guys want," David replied. "But it will be your choice, and it will be done with proper supervision." The kids nodded and then continued their homework. David looked at them with mixed emotions. Elena's betrayal brought great pain, but it also made him realize what really matters: honesty, truth, and relationships with people who truly love you. David did not seek further retaliation. Elena has paid the price for her behavior, her freedom, her reputation, her relationship with her children, and her future. This consequence is more radical than any additional punishment. 3 months later, Elena writes a letter to David from prison asking for forgiveness. David read the letter, then set it aside without replying. Forgiveness is a personal choice, but trust can never be restored once it has been so thoroughly broken. David continues to focus on raising his children and running his company. He learned a valuable lesson. In the digital age, the truth always surfaces. Every text message, every email, every call leaves an indelible mark. Those who try to manipulate the system and create false realities will eventually be destroyed by their own deceptions. Elena thinks she can use the legal system to destroy David, but she forgets a basic fact. When you try to deceive someone who specializes in building and understanding digital systems, you're doomed to fail. David defeated Elena on a battlefield of her own choosing, not through violent or illegal means, but by exposing the irrefutable truth. A year later, when David won the Tech Entrepreneur of the Year award, he said in his acceptance speech, "Success isn't just about business accomplishments. It's about sticking to honesty and truth in the face of betrayal and deception. Sometimes the greatest victory is not what you gain, but what you protect." The audience on stage applauded, but David knew the real victory was that he had protected himself and his children from further harm and ensured that justice was served. Elena is now serving time in prison. Vincent is in another state trying to rebuild his ruined life, and David and his children are moving on to build a new life based on truth and mutual respect. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.